Hello and welcome to the May edition of the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Fiona Taylor, and later on I'll be joined by Jules Duncan and Dr. Anton Rosenfeld, both on the team here at Garden Organic. So what's gone right or wrong for you so far this growing season? We'll be chatting about how we're getting on. A predominantly dry spring in our part of the world has relieved us of too many slugs on the one hand, but has affected germination levels on the other. Later on, we'll be visiting the garden of garden writer, trained ecologist and author Becky Searle, whose new book, Grow a New Garden, is all about starting from scratch. And in the postbag, we'll answer your questions on what to grow underneath fruit trees, how to succeed with the vegetable chayote, and we might just get a little philosophical with a question on the do's and don'ts of organic growing. But first, since Chris Collins is away this week, I'm off to join Jules Duncan in the virtual potting shed to find out how things are getting on in the garden. Thanks ever so much for pitching in and coming to our aid this month, Jules. How are you?
Really well, thanks, Fiona. It's lovely to be here.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of May's priorities, it would be good to understand what it is that gave you your passion for gardening.
I've always loved the outdoors anyway, and all of my family are keen gardeners, but I think seeing my grandfather's enthusiasm with his roses, and also it was a poppy, one single poppy plant, and seed head was about to pop off, and he told me to keep watching it during the day, and I must have only been about 4. And I kept going back to this poppy and watching it as it gradually opened and the seed head popped off it. It was just really, really lovely. And that just inspired me. And also the other thing is food. I love eating. So I'm encouraged to grow because I love food.
Yes, well, don't we all? I think grandparents are so wonderful, aren't they? If we've got any grandparents listening, the influence that you can have is just phenomenal. And it leads to lifelong, passions for things. My grandparents' garden was full of self-seeded alyssum everywhere, and the smell of alyssum just transports me back. I absolutely love it. It's gorgeous, and it's the kind of thing where people say, oh, it's a bit of a nuisance, it self-seeds everywhere. No, it's lovely because it self-seeds everywhere. It's absolutely lovely.
We actually sowed it around the compost bays here because it gave off a lovely scent, and it's right at sort of eye level, and you really appreciate it then. It's a tiny little flower, very popular in the 70s. But it's underrated, I think.
Absolutely lovely. So you spend all day looking after our beautiful demonstration garden here at Ryton Gardens near Coventry. Does that mean you've kind of gone off gardening by the time you get home?
Absolutely not. I love plants, and I've been known to actually garden using the security light. So I'm running backwards and forwards, like trying to get the light to come on so that I can see what I'm digging. And I think
can't stop.
I think the neighbours must think I'm absolutely mad.
What's your garden at home like?
It's very small. The front garden, the first thing you'll see is a massive pile of logs that my Labrador, bless her, brought back for me over a period of time, and I cannot part with those logs. So I've now turned them into a bit of a beetle bank. So we've got a bug hotel right at the beginning of the house, and then going into the back garden, the first thing you see is a mini veg patch. Because I want it straight outside my back door so I can see it, because I think they're attractive as well. I just love veg patches. So I thought, why has it got to be tucked away at the bottom? Have it right by the back door where I can enjoy it, but I can also keep a good eye on it as well. And because I've not got a lot of space, I'm limiting it to things that, like currants and things like that are expensive. So I've got a lot of soft fruit there. I've got rhubarb, and I'm intermingling with some salads and some onions and stuff that I just love eating, really. So, yeah.
And do you have flowers as well?
When I moved there a few years ago, there was just grass and nothing else. And I had to dig up some of that. I want to keep some of it. I've got a little working Cocker Spaniel who loves running around the garden, so I need to give her space. She likes digging as well, unfortunately. But we've come to a compromise. She has the empty flower pots and loves playing with those. And then I've created borders around the edge, which she's learnt now to leave alone. And I'm trying to colour scheme as well, because I love so many plants. The difficulty is to not just go mad when you see a plant. Oh, I love that, and I've got to put it in. So I'm trying to get a bit of a colour scheme going on. And so I've got borders with some sort of pale yellows and then some pinks and purples, and trying to make it, even though it's a small space, have little zones. And then moving further down the garden, there's a little seating area at the end. And I've got some jasmine. The jasmine was going to climb up an archway at the bottom of the garden. That hasn't happened yet. So it's winding its own way up a bird feeder. And it's lovely, but it's a little bit more naturalistic. So plenty of scope for wildlife biodiversity. I've got a bird bath, I haven't got a pond, but yeah, I encourage as much wildlife into the garden as possible.
Yes, nature in the garden at this time of year in particular, actually, is just magic, isn't it? We've got a bird box that we sighted a few years ago, and this week we've just noticed there's a family of great tits nesting in
amazing.
the bird box, and it's just magic to see them coming in and out. We're wondering if they've already hatched, actually, because it seems like both the male and the female are coming in and out, quite rapidly. So, but of course we don't know. We don't have a camera inside it or anything technical like that.
A good reason for not using chemicals in your garden, because if they're picking off the caterpillars and feeding them till they're young, then they're not going to be contaminated. So it's really good.
May, it's my favourite month.
Yeah, it's mine too. Always has been.
Okay, and what do you find is so special about May?
I think it's that time where you feel the sun on your back as well. I was weeding in the garden with our wonderful volunteers the other day here, and we were just quietly, methodically doing our weeding, and the blackbird was singing in the background, and it was just really quiet and beautiful.
And it's quite a forgiving month as well, May, because if things haven't perhaps worked out in your seed sowing and things haven't germinated, there's still plenty of time to go again, of course, isn't there?
Absolutely. You can sow most things now. And I've been quite organised this year at home. But in the past, I've sown sweet peas very late in May, at the end of May. And they flower until November. So when everybody else's have gone, I've still got sweet peas. So there's something to be said for being a little bit tardy sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. There's always a bonus, isn't there? Chris and I have talked about me narrowing my food growing down to 5 sort of key crops this year, just to help me focus and help me get going with those. So I'm going to ask you for your advice, because some of it's going okay, but some of it's not. So the 5 vegetables were potatoes, parsnips, as many leaves as I can do, sort of salad leaves and spinach, sweet corn and runner beans. Sweet corn and runner beans I don't need to worry about for the moment, but the parsnips I have sown, and I have had no germination, 0 germination.
That's not uncommon, because parsnips are notoriously difficult to grow.
Are
because
they?
You have to buy new seed each year.
Okay, that's my first mistake.
Yeah, so don't hold on to any old packets of parsnip seeds. Get rid of those. You can put them on the compost heap and then buy a new packet and sow them. But also, it's been a very dry spring. We've had a very damp autumn and winter, and then a very, very hot, dry, early spring. So a lot of our stuff in the garden we've had to re-sow because they just haven't germinated. They've dried out very, very quickly. So I would say the problem there is you've probably got old seed, and that you need to concentrate on the watering.
All right, well, there definitely was old seed. You're absolutely right about that. So I went through my box and thought, I've got some parsnip seed. Don't need to buy any. But in fact, I did need to buy some. I must admit that I'm not the best at making sure I've stored them in optimum conditions. So they will have been stored in my shed, which gets very hot and then gets very cold, which has probably not done them a great deal of good. I have done really well with my lettuce. I've got a whole lot of mixed lettuce coming up. At the same time, I sowed lots of Italian parsley as part of my leafy crops. All of that's germinated. I'm really thrilled about that, actually, because it took a little longer than other seeds to germinate, so I was beginning to doubt it, but then it's suddenly all come forward, so I'm excited about that.
So parsley sometimes can take a while to germinate, so
yeah,
and that's why you've been putting a date on the label as well. It's important to know when you've sown it, so that you know when it's time to, whether you want to give it a bit longer, or whether you think, no, that's it, we're going to ditch it because it's been too long.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll crack on with direct sowing some new parsnip seed, which I shall go and buy from Tamar Organics, and I'll direct sow outside in drills, which Chris will be very pleased to hear about because he loves his drill sowing. So I'll tell him all about that next month. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the garden here at Garden Organic, which you spend all your working life nurturing, Jules, and we're immensely grateful. It looks absolutely brilliant. But just tell us a bit more about it.
We've been really busy over the winter and the spring, just changing things up a little bit. We're altering the ornamental beds so that we're incorporating some vegetables in there as well. So we've got the traditional veg plots, but we've also got the ornamental with pockets of vegetables sown in amongst them. So I think it can resonate with people a little bit more because not everybody's got space for a veg patch. And we're just really experimenting with that this year to see how that works. I'm also thinking about food security as well, trying to encourage people to grow as much of their own food as possible. And we saw that during the pandemic when there were shortages of some some foods. And it's just really good to know that somebody's having fresh stuff from their own garden as well. And the demonstration is really doing what it says on the tin, really demonstrating to people what they can do, even in a small space. They can have food and flowers. It doesn't have to look like an allotment, or it doesn't have to look like a flower market. It can be, you can have best of both worlds by growing them together.
And of course, it's a diversity of plants that's so important for biodiversity.
Absolutely.
So do you sow a number of different varieties of things together?
Yes, we've got an experiment we're doing as well this year where we've got different types of carrots and we've got a row of each, and we're just going to see which does better in the circumstances, in the location that they're placed in. Quite a warm, dry bed, so we're going to see whether or not which variety works best. And then we're going to also, within the veg plot, we're going to be successionally sowing carrots. They're very good for doing that. You can just keep doing that over really up until June, really, end of June, keep sowing.
Yes, I love carrots. I've had huge success growing them in pots. Really easy to grow in pots. Why is that?
Partly because if it's a deep pot, they've got a nice deep root growth, and the soil will be very free draining, and so they'll grow really well. But also, if it's raised up, then it may well avoid the carrot root fly. This year we've put some netting up to try and fox the carrot root fly, because they did decimate a crop of our carrots here last year. What happens is the carrot root fly only flies at a certain height, and it gets confused if it comes across a barrier, and then it avoids the area. So we're hoping that we don't have clever carrot root fly.
The thing about carrot root fly is it's quite low flying, isn't it?
That's right, yes. And that's why we've constructed net, which is over 50 centimetres high, to stop the fly in its tracks.
Okay, because they fly below 50 or 60 centimetres at worst. So that's all you need to do. If you are constructing a barrier, it's got to be light permeable, I would imagine.
That's right, yeah. And you don't need to put it over the top, obviously, because they won't be going down into the plot. It's just around the edges to stop them.
Do you have to net them all the way through? Can you take the little barriers down at some stage?
We'll leave them for the majority of the growing time. You can remove them later on.
Yeah. All right. Other jobs to be getting on with then this month in May. What's top of the list, Jules?
Well, we've been sowing seed ever since January. We did our chilies and aubergines then. So now we're moving on to things like the sweet corn and squashes in May, and the runner beans. So that's a great time. It's a real indicator of the season, isn't it, once you start sowing those seeds? And now with no risk of frost, we can be putting plants out into the garden as well that we've raised under cover.
Although we do have a little bit of a risk of frost.
Yes, and it depends where you are.
Yes.
It depends where you are in the country, but it's minimised and it's not likely to be as harsh.
Yeah.
So what we would recommend is acclimatising plants. So if you've got them under cover, get them out. If you haven't got a cold frame, just put them out. It's a bit of a sort of hokey-cokey of plants where you're in, out. So for over a period of about a week, you get them out and they're getting used to the different temperatures. Keep an eye on the weather. If it does look like it's going to drop significantly, then take them in overnight, but gradually start leaving them out and getting them used to their new place.
And anything in particular in the flower garden?
Yeah, now's the time for getting the dahlias in, because they're protected over the winter. They're very susceptible to frost. So we're lucky that we've had ours drying off in a glass house, and we've now started potting them on and watering them. Some will be grown in pots, some will be in the soil. But they now can come out, and so can the cannas as well.
Okay, all right. And what about weeds this time of year, which seem to kind of grow, when you've got your back turned?
They really do. We've noticed that here. And there's a difference in 2 days here. Just a little bit of rain and some warmth, and the weeds really take off. So vigilance there. Keep watching. Keep pulling them out while they're small, and they shouldn't cause a problem. On a hot, dry day, you could hoe them off, and just they'll then desiccate on the surface of the soil.
I do worry about bare patches of soil, that stage in spring where you've had to kind of prepare the ground, and then you've done your drill sowing or you've planted a few things out. But there does seem to be a lot of bare soil around. What would you recommend for me on that?
There can be a lot of bare soil, but what I'd recommend is perhaps growing some lettuces in just a few cell trays, and then you can put those in wherever there are any gaps. And the beauty is then you're obviously going to be able to eat them and enjoy them as young salad.
Okay. They're also brilliant in the ornamental garden, I think. Lettuces, but when they run up to seed, they're just such a magnificent pyramid structure. So yes, I'm all for lettuces in the flower beds. It's a lovely idea.
And the different colours as well, having a mixture of a green and red lettuce, for instance, it looks really attractive.
Yeah, definitely. What about the pond? I've been a bit dismayed that my pond has really attracted an awful lot of blanket weed and duckweed, and I'm pretty sure I know why that is. It's because it's under a few trees, and therefore it gets an awful lot of leaf fall in the autumn. We've got a couple of ponds here at Ryton. What's the plan here?
We've got an issue here as well with quite a lot of blanket weed, and we're scooping that off as much as possible and leaving that on the side, so if there are any creatures in there, they can crawl back into the water. But really, for maintenance of a pond, you're looking at a dormant season, because we don't want to be going in and disturbing any newts or frogs or froglets and toads in the waters by just scraping off the surface of blanket weed and then leaving that so that things can crawl back in.
Okay, and it's been quite a hot April, so the level of my pond has really dropped. So I guess by topping it up from the water butts, that will dilute some of that nitrate that's causing the imbalance in the water.
Yes, we always top up from the water butts here, and we've noticed that here that the levels have dropped quite significantly.
The other thing I've done around my pond is I've planted a load of irises, and I'm really excited because this will be the first year that I'll have that display, and they are, I think, quite possibly my favourite flower. I just adore them. They're an extraordinary flower, aren't they?
They're beautiful.
Really
quite
beautiful.
A variety as well.
And I think that's what happens in May. The colour starts to come into the garden, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
We've gone from that verdant green through the spring into this colour. Is there anything I should be doing to encourage more flowers in my garden at this time of year? Is there any feeding or anything like that, pruning?
Well, we use a comfrey feed. We've got the National Collection of Comfrey, and we use Bocking 14, which our founder Lawrence Hills recommended as being the best form of comfrey to make plant food. And that's really good because it's got the balance of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. And so it's great for everything, for root growth, for general leafy growth, and for flowers and fruit as well. So we tend to concentrate, if there's something in a container, we'd make sure we give it a feed of that, particularly as well soft fruits. So things like the black currants, the white currants, red currants really would benefit, and that helps them create really lovely fruit later on.
So your perennials in particular could do with a feed in May.
If there's anything in a container, definitely give it a feed, and your soft fruits.
Okay, good advice. Right, I'm racking up the tasks to be cracking on with this month. The other thing that's going on at Garden Organic is we're getting ready to go to Gardeners World Live, which is, of course, a huge show at the NEC in Birmingham. And this year we've got a special display garden ourselves there. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's very exciting. The tension is building up now. We've been working on it for several months, starting with a plan, and then looking at what resources we need, what materials, what plants. The veg that's going into the garden are coming along nicely. We're going to have a little alpine area, a couple of seating areas, and some very mature trees in there as well, and really hoping that people will pick up ideas from it. So they might not want to recreate the whole thing, but little pockets in there that can be copied. For instance, we're going to have a pond there as well, and it will be nice to show people how they can, even in a small garden, have a pond area.
And what's the theme?
The theme is concentrating on biodiversity and how you can attract as much wildlife into your garden as possible. It's just really improves your garden if you can have birds and insects.
I think the thing that amazes me about doing garden at an exhibition centre, which is what the NEC is that you're creating a natural space in the middle of a sort of, a concrete desert, really. And at the beginning of the week, you don't really see much in the way of nature, but by the end of the week, nature has discovered you.
Absolutely.
It's extraordinary, which just then gives people, inspiration. Doesn't matter where you live, you can make a difference to nature.
Certainly see that in a pond. Within a day, really, you can see life turning up in a pond. It's amazing. It's incredible.
A few weeks back, I had the privilege of meeting author, trained ecologist and keen organic gardener Becky Searle. Becky has been showing the world how to garden organically via her Instagram account since 2018. This year, Becky embarked on a new journey with the release of her first book, Grow a New Garden. I spoke with her about what ignited her passion for gardening, the role ecology plays, and the importance of seed saving.
In terms of gardening, I think it began because I'd never really questioned whether or not I would garden. So the moment I had a garden, I kind of went into autopilot. From having seen my grandparents and my parents gardening, I thought, well, I just simply have to. And actually, I really wanted to have a garden when I was a kid. My parents gave me a little scrubby patch of earth around the side of our house, which was just full of bugs, and nothing grew there because it was in total shade. But I always wanted to grow a garden. And then when I got a new house in 2018, I set up an Instagram page because I was bombarding my parents with pictures of my garden. And I think they were getting a bit bored of me. So I thought, instead of just bombarding them, I'll stick them on Instagram back in the lovely days where it just used to be pictures, so that they can go and peruse them at their own leisure. And then people started getting interested. And then in 2020, I found myself unable to do my job. I was a sports massage therapist. And so I concentrated on doing some gardening and basically trying to tie in my ecology degree with my garden and trying to just educate people on the things that I felt like people needed to know about their gardens, really, from an ecological point of view.
Tell us about your ecology degree. Why did you select that as a degree in the first place?
So my mum's actually an ecologist. So ecology was something that I was kind of brought up around, and it was quite a new thing way back when I went to university, and it just felt right for me, really. I wanted something that was challenging intellectually, but also got me outside and just allowed me to play with bugs and worms and plants and everything. So it just was the perfect balance for me.
And how do you find now that plays through into your gardening?
So it's the first thing and the last thing when I'm gardening. So basically, I see my garden as being almost like an ecological laboratory because it's a place that I get to play with and I get to influence what's going on in it. But ultimately, I don't have the final say, and it's nature and the ecology of the garden that really is in control. I just sort of give myself the illusion of being in control, and I love that. So I really like to get up really close and look at what's going on in the garden and then try to figure out why those things are happening. So if I've got a pest in my garden, rather than treating the pest, I'm going to figure out what the cause of that is and whether this is my garden trying to tell me something.
I'm really interested in the notion of a kind of diagnostic approach, that you're observing what's going on and what the garden's trying to tell you. Can you give us any kind of really good examples of that?
Yeah, so I think the example that most people can identify with the most is weeds. And so when it comes to the soil needs to have live plants in it because live plants are a big part of what the organisms in the soil eat. They don't actually eat the plants, so they're not causing any damage to the plants, but they're eating what's called root exudates, which are little packages of carbohydrates and sugars that the plants pump down through their roots to feed the life in the soil. And the life in the soil then turns this into glues which hold the soil structure together, and then they also release nutrients to the plants. So it's this lovely symbiosis between plants and soil. And when you have bare soil, the soil wants to grow plants. So weeds are kind of the first response team here. They grow really quickly. They also grow on a particular type of nitrogen that exists in poorer soils so that these weeds can put on this growth really, really quickly. And so when we see lots and lots of weeds, we can immediately assume that our soil asking us for something and it's lacking in organic matter. And the organic matter, if we add that to our soil, we will see that the soil is then starting to feed on the organic matter that we're adding, say compost or well-rotted manure or something like that. And we'll see less weeds because the life in the soil is actually starting to work in a different way. Then obviously if we grow plants in that soil, if we have healthier soil, we will have fewer weeds. It's not a silver bullet. We're always going to have a few weeds, but certainly weeds is the one that most people struggle with the most, I think.
How does that apply to the really pernicious weeds, the ones that we all kind of really dread when we see them coming up? You know, bindweed is the one that I immediately think of.
Yeah, so it kind of doesn't apply so much to the ones that are always there. But certainly anything fast growing, something like bindweed, will, in order to be able to grow as quickly as it can, it needs to feed on nitrates. And nitrates in the soil basically allow plants to grow really, really fast. So vegetable plants often feed on nitrates as well, and they will have a sort of balance of nitrates and ammonia in their nitrogen that they eat. But weeds that grow really fast feed predominantly on nitrates. And so if you have a poor soil community, poor organisms in the soil aren't very well balanced, you have a lot of nitrifying bacteria. And the nitrifying bacteria are almost there to create nitrates so that we can have quick growing plants that will cover the soil and start the soil. The moment the soil starts to get to a point where it's covered and it's being fed well and it's healthy, then what happens is the fungi comes into the soil. It reduces the number of nitrifying bacteria, which then means we have a better balance of nitrogen in the soil. So we have fewer nitrates and more ammonium, which then supports a sort of steadier growth, which is what we want really for most of our plants in the garden.
So other than adding compost to our soils and doing what we can to diversify our planting, what are the other things that we can do or we can observe to ensure that our soil is as healthy as it possibly can be?
So we need to make sure that the ecosystem in the soil is fed. That is the key thing. But also we need to leave it alone. And the way that I look at this is if you had a forest, a beautiful forest ecosystem that was just cracking on and doing its thing, being a forest full of birds and full of plants. And we came in and we chopped down all the trees and bulldozed it to help the ecosystem. That's kind of how I see digging over the soil. And I don't mean digging as in you've got to dig a hole to plant something in the ground. Obviously that needs to happen. I mean full scale digging as in digging over annually or double digging, the kind of thing that we've been told to do through the horticultural industry for a long time. And people are now realizing that that's not a very good idea. Now, the reason for this is that when we dig, we actually break down the organic matter in the soil. So a lot of the organic matter that's in the soil is held either in the live organisms in the soil, many of which just are not able to cope with any exposure to sunlight or just the outside world, basically. They're designed in their little tiny squishy soft bodies to be underground. But also there's lots and lots of organic glues, which I mentioned earlier. The moment these reach UV light, they break down and they are released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which we know is a bit of a disaster in terms of climate change, etc. And obviously I'm not suggesting that somebody digging over their bed in their allotment is going to contribute towards climate change hugely, but on a global scale it makes a massive impact. But we're also breaking down the organic matter, which is the thing that we should be trying to build up in our beds. So it's not enough to just add compost or well-rotted manure. We have to do that as a mulch in the same way that nature would do it. Just add it to the top and let the soil do the rest. And that's so important because then we get the aggregation that the microorganisms in the soil do, that holding together of the soil structure, which is what makes it well aerated and well drained and able to hold moisture, etc. So it's really important to keep the soil fed, but it's also really important that it is left alone.
You've just written a book, Becky, which is a phenomenal achievement. Give us a tour of the book.
Okay, so basically in the book, it's designed to take you through the whole process of starting a new garden or just starting again with the space that you've got. And the thing that I really wanted to do was try and teach people how gardens work and how plants work, how the soil works, so that they can trust the process and they can understand what's going on at every stage and they can make their own informed decisions and throw out all the wacky gardening advice that we see on the internet these days. So we talk about the importance of building a garden, not just for ourselves, but for the environment and everything else, so our health and things like that. and then how to manage the soil, a whole chapter on soil, so it's quite exciting. And then we've got planning, because I genuinely believe that we have to create a space that we like. If we're going to actually work in the garden, it has to be planned, it has to be something that we like. And then there's a chapter on designing the garden, and when I was writing this book, I knew that there had to be a chapter on design, but I'm not a garden designer and this is way out of my comfort zone. So I thought, well, how do I design a garden? And the honest truth of how I design a garden is I call my friend Kenny. And Kenny is I think he's the head gardener at Covent Garden. What he doesn't know about garden design isn't worth knowing. He is absolutely incredible. And so whenever I'm designing a new garden, which I've done several times over the last decade because of regularly moving house, I sit down and I call Kenny and ask him what I should do. And so I thought, right, in this section, what we're going to do is we're going to distill what Kenny tells me, and we're going to give Kenny's knowledge to people so that it's the book sort of remains authentic, because I don't want to give information on something that I don't feel comfortable with. So there's Kenny's top tips in there, and they are really fantastic because they are so straightforward, easy to follow. Anybody can do it, and it really does make a huge difference to your garden. And Kenny and I went to great lengths to make sure that it was very simple to follow.
It's really interesting to think that you needed to talk to a garden designer, because I think that's right. I think what's happened is, ecology has gone in one direction and perhaps design has gone in another direction. There are a few, of course, well-known pioneers who bring the two together. But I think for those of us who are trying to make a difference just in our own gardens, which are often small and we can't quite sort of rewild them, I think you need a design element in order to pack as much as you possibly can in. So I think that's a really interesting notion that you're the ecologist, you're a hugely keen gardener, he's the designer, he's obviously a hugely keen gardener. I think that's brilliant that you brought it together like that. Okay, again with your ecologist hat on, if you were looking around the rest of your garden, you talked earlier about diagnostics and, things giving you indications that life is happening or life is not happening. What other parts of the garden do you tend to use as your bellwether?
Yeah, so I think pests is another key one. And obviously, I think the sort of tying back to the book, that pests are a huge problem, especially in new gardens. And this is just such an indicator of how healthy your ecosystem is. And the reason that we classify things as pests is basically because they're primary consumers. So this is very much an ecology hat here, I'm afraid. But primary consumers are the things that eat plants. And so you won't find pests that are anything else on the food chain other than primary consumers. And so we see them as pests because they're eating our plants. Anything else in the garden is eating those things that eat plants and other creatures in the garden. So we don't see those as pests because they're not damaging what we want in our gardens. But if we have only got primary consumers, i.e. slugs, wood lice, all those kinds of things that eat plant matter, then we have an imbalance in our ecosystem and we need to try and attract more wildlife. What often happens is that people go, oh my goodness, look at these aphids or these slugs or something. I must add something to my garden to try and get rid of them, or I must spray them, or I must, even if you're an organic gardener, I must put beer traps or something like that. And actually what you're going to do is you're going to immediately make it more difficult for the things that want to eat those slugs, wood lice, aphids, whatever it is, to come and move into your garden, because they're only going to move in when there's food. So we have to think about the ecosystem the whole way round rather than just the problem. So the problem is that we don't have enough things to eat the slugs, not that we've got too many slugs. And one of the things that I like to suggest really is, if by planning your garden you can plan to put a lot of plants in all at once, you're going to have a lot more success than if you just put a couple of things in piecemeal here and there. So this is why I think garden planning is so important, because if you put 50 plants in and you've got 50 slugs, you've only got one slug per plant. But if you have 50 slugs and you put 2 plants in, you've got 25 slugs per plant, and instantly those plants have a much less a much lower chance of survival. So yeah, I think that again, planning comes into it. And then obviously if we are really, really struggling, and there are some people who really can't grow anything because our slug population is too high, then you have to look at growing things that are slug resistant so that you can build up that ecosystem. And you have to think about how you're going to attract the things that actually predate the slugs. And a lot of that is in the soil.
The slug problem was a big deal last year. Everybody was talking about it because it had been so wet in the spring. And I actually became quite fascinated by them, I have to say. I mean, they are extraordinary creatures. I think from a food growing perspective, they are just so frustrating to deal with. Can you tell us what the slug's role is in the ecosystem?
So yeah, a lot of people want to know this because it's one of those things that is going to help you to come to terms with them. We're never going to be able to get rid of them, especially if we're organic gardeners, and we have to learn to love the slug. But slugs are a really important food source for a lot of creatures. They are also incredible recycling agents. So they are really, really good at keeping our gardens recycling nutrients. So they're really good at breaking down plant matter and returning it to the soil, and they are just kind of nature's cleanup crew, really. And the fantastic thing about slugs, I think, is their success. They are just such a successful group, and this is primarily because they're adaptable. So slugs mainly like to eat things that are ailing, that are dying, but they will also eat basically anything they can get their hands on. So if they can't find bits of dead leaf, they will go on to bits of live leaf, for example, and seedlings are a particular bugbear for most of us. And seedlings are in that really vulnerable stage, aren't they? So when you put seedlings out, you kind of cross your fingers and cross your heart and look at them like, I'm never going to see you ever again because the slugs are going to come in. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're growing really nice, healthy seedlings. We're putting them out a little bit bigger. If we know that we've got a problem with slugs, then certainly bigger plants are going to be more resilient against those slugs. So if we can grow them in our greenhouses a little bit longer, then they're going to be a bit more resilient. Also, managing what you're doing in terms of the weather. Last year was a disastrous year because it rained for basically like 7 months or something. We had an awful lot of rainfall. And that's really favourable conditions for slugs and not so favourable for plants, because plants need water, obviously, but not so much water that they're constantly being watered all the time. But they need warmth and they need sunlight. And the warmer it is, actually, the faster their growth will be. So because we had quite a cold year last year and it was quite wet, the growth was slightly slower. And then, of course, cold and wet is good for our slugs. So the kind of perfect storm, I suppose, happened.
Earlier today, we had a lovely walk around your allotment, and you are growing so many things from seed this year. Are you a fanatical seed saver, seed sower?
I am quite a fanatical seed sower. So I think it basically boils down to being a little bit cheap.
You've got an Instagram account called So Much More. So you're obviously into it.
Yeah, no, I am really into sowing from seed. I just think that it's so much more satisfying if you can grow something from seed yourself, and it just makes it more fun and it's a lot cheaper. And then you can go on and save the seeds and use them again next year. And then things will adapt to the climate and the environment that you have. And it's just much, much more sustainable and much more interesting and fun.
Do you think it tastes better?
If it's grown from seed, I think that heritage and heirloom varieties taste better, absolutely. And this is because they are literally favoured for the fact that they taste good. Whereas the things that we buy off of the shelves in garden centres, the F1 varieties, are usually because they have good resistance to carrot fly, or they have good resistance to blight, or they produce really good harvests, like big harvests, not because they're really interesting, unique flavours. I think a lot of the flavour is lost when you have these kind of varieties. But when you sow something from seed, especially if it's an organic soil, and if it's in healthy soil, it does just taste so much better. I mean, I saw something yesterday that said, supermarket food tastes like disappointment. I think that's quite true.
Do you grow from plugs at all?
I do buy the occasional plug because disasters happen, and sometimes you really want things in your garden, particularly if you've got a kind of plan in your head. I mean, I do think that with vegetable gardens, you need to be able to adapt in what you're doing. There's always going to be disasters, but sometimes there's certain things that you really, really want to grow. And I think it's okay if you are going to just get some plug plants. I'm certainly not militant about it. And I think it's better to grow food and to have that experience than not. So if growing from plugs is how that happens for you, absolutely fine.
You're big on planning ahead, getting ahead, thinking about it. That sounds like it's really key to all your gardening and to all your principles that you talk about in the book. When it comes to food growing, do you try and put as much out in one go as you possibly can? Thinking about the slugs, but just thinking more widely about getting the season started.
Yeah, so I do try and put as much out as I can at one time because it is a great way of reducing your chances of losing everything, but also because it's important to have the soil covered and have live plants in the ground as much as you possibly can. So there is a gap at the moment where there are not so many plants in our allotments and in our gardens because the season is just beginning and the winter crops are just coming to an end. But anything that you can leave in the ground, basically leave it in for as long as you possibly can, take it out and plant straight into it again. And this is where seeds really are very, very useful. It's worth growing things even if you're not planning to eat them. So radishes is a really good example. There's no way that I could eat as many radishes as I grow, but I grow them because if I don't use them, they will go in the compost and they will add something to my soil next year. And they will also just keep the soil covered for that time that they're in it, and that will help to prevent weeds. It will help to bolster the ecosystem. It will help to just build the garden, basically. So using things like radish rocket as well is a really good one because when that goes to flower, it attracts nice beneficial wasps, and it's also good for hoverflies. So there's lots of little ways that you can use seeds and you can use plants by basically just getting as much out there as possible. And flowers is another one. If you want to just fill a space, if you're thinking, oh, there's no way that I'm going to eat as many vegetables as I've planted here, plant some flowers, enjoy them. I think it's better to have the space filled and have the space used than it is to have it empty.
You brought out a lovely seed collector's kit recently. It's a beautiful box. I've got one in front of me with gorgeous botanical drawings on the front of it, and it contains 50 cards of seeds you can sow and save and how to be successful really growing from seed.
I think it's kind of an art that's being lost at the moment, and I think it's really, really important that we, the gardeners and the people, understand the value of seeds. Seeds are just so important to the point where, big organizations like Garden Organic, like the Millennium Seed Bank and all those kind of things are dedicated to saving seeds because they are essentially the building blocks from which all life comes. So they are really, really, really key. And the idea with the box is that we have vegetables or fruit and vegetables, kitchen garden plants, and flowers. And I've tried to choose as many plants as possible to cover as wide a range of seed saving possibilities as possible. So some of the plants are a little bit out there and a little bit weird, but that's so that you can hopefully learn how to collect the seeds from them and then apply that to the other plants that are very, very similar. So you're going to, for example, with tomatoes, you can learn how to collect a tomato seed and then that's it. You can collect all tomato seeds, but there's lots of flowers where they form pods and the principle remains the same for every single time you see a pod. And then there's also a little booklet in there that teaches you kind of which varieties you can save from and just how to have a bit more success with seed sowing and how you can successfully store them as well, because obviously that's really important. So yeah, it's all just about trying to create a kind of closed system in your garden, I suppose, and make sure that you can take advantage of this free resource, which is just amazing.
Yeah, I love that sort of closed loop system of sowing your own seed, leaving some to go right through so that it sets the seed and you can actually then harvest the seed, but you can harvest the flowers and the food from the others. So again, it goes back to, not being mean about the amount of seed you sow. You might as well sow it because it's going to give you more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's going to give you more. A lot of things will give you flowers, even if you don't want to have the vegetables. And if you don't want to have the flowers either, they'll give you seeds so you can have it next year and then you can give it to your friends. Yeah, I just think if you can sow much more, then perhaps you are just going to have more fun with it. And also it's good for your soil and it's good for your garden ecosystem.
Time now to open up the postbag, and I'm here with Jules Duncan and with Dr. Anton Rosenfeld. The first question is from Valerie, who says, I've read your information on the type or species of Chayote to grow successfully in the UK for them to bear big enough fruit for consumption, rather than just producing leaves. Now, I've tried the smooth-skinned ones, as they're the only ones I could find, but they put on a lot of vegetation but produce no fruit. Please, can you advise me where I could purchase Chayotes, preferably grown here in the UK? I would like to grow them outside and not under glass. Okay, Anton, this is really a new one on me. I haven't heard of Chayote, so I just want to understand, first of all, exactly what it is and what it looks like.
So the Chayote fruit, it looks a little bit like an avocado, but it's eaten like a squash, but it's a bit more starchy, really. It's a bit like a cross between a squash and a potato. They're really, really nice, actually. They've got a really nice homely flavour to them. They're eaten a lot by Jamaicans.
Quite hard to grow?
Yeah, I think they're quite a challenge, to be honest. I wouldn't recommend them for beginners. They've got lots of different names as well. Yeah. The other names I most commonly hear are Christophine or Chocho. That's by far the most sort of common names you also hear as well.
And is it possible to grow them outside in this country?
It's marginal. I would say they need a really pretty sheltered spot. Ideally, if you've got something like a carport, that will definitely trap enough warmth. I have seen them grown outside in London in that sort of hot city atmosphere. I think further north, you're probably going to struggle.
Okay. And are they actually part of the squash family?
Yeah, they are. They are part of the sort of cucurbid family. So.
Okay, so that gives an idea of how they would grow and the habit that they would form.
Yeah, so like I was saying a bit earlier, they're quite a challenge to grow for a number of reasons. They really are quite peculiar because what you'll find is if you take one of these fruits home and perhaps leave it in the fruit bowl for a few weeks, you'll find it starts to actually sprout right out from the fruit. You'll see that the fruit starts growing. I guess quite a lot of people, when they see that, are quite encouraged and decide to plant it. Now, unfortunately, like a lot of sort of tropical crops, you'll find that our summer day lengths are too long for them to flower. This goes against people's intuition. We have very long days, much longer than if you're on the equator. Things just carry on producing lots of leaves, basically, because they're used to having these 12-hour days that you get when you're on the equator. So the challenge is to find a variety which is not sensitive to day length. And from our experience, it seems to be the spiny ones which work a lot better in the UK climate. Unfortunately, it seems to always be the smooth ones that you find in the shops. But it's the spiny ones who've got a much better chance of them actually fruiting.
But they're harder to find. Okay, let's say you've got hold of a spiny one.
Yeah.
You've brought it home.
Yeah.
What's the best thing to do next?
So depending on the time of year, I mean, ideally you want to be starting to grow it in the early spring to let them sprout and get a reasonable size. You can then pot them on into a pot and get actually growing as quite a reasonable sized pot. And then just wait till the last frost and put them outside. So just like you would with any other cucurbit.
Does it need lots of sunshine?
Yeah, it needs a reasonable amount of sunshine. It's just like any sort of squash, really.
I must admit, I'm tempted to give it a try. I mean, imagine actually then raising your own and being able to pick them and cook them. If you were going to cook it, what would you recommend?
So I put them into a traditional Caribbean dish. I'd put quite a bit of coconut in there, sometimes a bit of ginger. I'd fry them. They're really good at absorbing any sort of flavour, basically. So they'll absorb those flavours really well. And then I'd add a sort of tomato-based sauce to it. And it's a really sort of wholesome, nice, spicy dish.
Well, good luck, Valerie. Let us know how you get on. Next question. I read on your website that clover is good to sow amongst fruit bushes and trees. Can you tell me which variety of clover is most suitable? And that question came from Neil. Jules, what's your advice here?
Well, first of all, Neil, I think it's really good that you are growing lots of soft fruit and fruit trees, because apart from anything else in the shops, it's really expensive to buy. So it's really good. I'd recommend anyone does that. But any clover really is good to put underneath plants. We are trialling white clover underneath some cabbages this year in the garden and seeing what difference that makes with and without the clover. It is part of the legume family, so it does fix nitrogen into the soil. So that will obviously help give strong growth, make a healthy plant. And if you've got a healthy plant, then you're onto a winner there, because they're not going to be so affected by any pests or diseases. The other thing is it's a good weed control, and particularly under soft fruit that has quite shallow roots, you don't want to disturb those. So having the clover there, they'll keep the weeds down and obviously be fixing nitrogen into the soil as well, which will be good for the plants.
I mean, it's a wonderful plant. I absolutely love clover. I would have it everywhere. But of course, it has that sort of spreading property, doesn't it? And means that you're not going to have bare soil.
Absolutely, yes. And it's going to be keeping the weeds out. You're not going to need to weed as much. It's going to be keeping the moisture in and as I say, fixing the nitrogen into the soil. I think what I would go for, because there are different types of clover, but I'd be inclined to go for the white small-leafed clover and just chop it down. And it's a perennial, so it's going to come back every year. Whereas with the crimson clover, which has got a beautiful, more elongated flower to it, that's an annual. So it's more work if you're having to plant stuff every year. And every clover is going to attract insects, pollinators. So that's, again, a win-win for an area where you're growing fruit, because the more pollinators, the more fruit you get.
Are you a fan of clover, Anton?
Well, I'm a massive fan. Yeah, we've done lots of work on it over the years. Clover's a great plant, really. I think the only thing I would say about it is that you probably might need to mow it quite often just to keep it under control, so it's not sort of competing too much against the fruit bushes and trees. Because I'd say white clover is the least vigorous of all the clovers, so it's definitely the right one to choose. But even white clover can be a little bit of a thug sometimes, you know.
I'm fully enthused now. I'm going to go and order some seeds and scatter them liberally. I can't wait, actually. Okay, final question now, which is kind of philosophical, so let's dive in. Ian has written in. Let me read what he says. Hello, your advice sheets on developing soil health, etc. are very helpful. It's good to see that being organic isn't always black or white. Could you perhaps summarise some rules of thumb in a wider context, though? For example, to say my vegetable plot is organic, must I always buy certified organic seeds or tubers? And when would my own saved seeds be organic if they originated from non-organic seeds? The same with compostable materials, for example, spent brewer's grains or hops. Would they have to be organically grown before use, or are they okay once composted? What about plants, fruit bushes, trees that have been inherited with a plot or a garden? How long do I have to manage them organically before I can call their produce organic? Yours in bewilderment, Ian. Well, Ian, it was just great to have a question like this with so much depth. Thank you so much for writing in. The thing about Garden Organic is that we don't actually certify. We're here to encourage ordinary people to adopt what we would call, in this context, the principles of organic gardening. So to garden by those principles, which we'll come on to in a second. But fundamentally, it's about thinking of your garden as a system and doing everything you can to grow and garden in harmony with nature. So there are not so many rules and regulations when you come to us, because we're not in the certification business. We're in the enabling business, particularly for ordinary gardeners like you and me. So to give you a bit more to go on, I'm going to ask Jules to expand on the principles of organic gardening, but I want to also say that if you want to do some more research yourself into those principles, then if you come to our website and search Principles of Organic Gardening, you'll find lots of information there. You can also buy your own booklet called The Principles of Organic Gardening, The Natural Way to Grow, which is a brilliant resource to have. It's not as big as a book. It's about 50 pages, and it's a beautiful leaflet that is full of inspiration for how you can do everything you can to garden in harmony with nature. So, Jules, give us an overview.
Well, yes, Ian, I can see how you could find this overwhelming because there's so much information out there, and we actually set the gold standard of how we would ideally like people to garden and make it accessible to people. We have written the 5 principles of organic growing to make it as easy as possible. If every gardener was gardening organically, then the world is going to be a better place.
Absolutely.
So we want to keep it simple. Obviously, here we follow every single principle. And if you're at the point where you're just starting out and you can only attain a couple of those, then that's okay. Start from where you're at and then work to improving. So the 5 principles would be that make sure you've got a healthy soil, because if your soil is healthy, ideally making your own compost to add to it, then you're going to have healthy plants that are not going to be so easily attacked by pests or diseases. Adding your compost to the soil as well is then going to help with the structure and retaining moisture in the soil. The other thing is to encourage biodiversity, and we do feed the birds here. We have ponds, so we've got a good toad population, which keeps down the slugs. It's when visitors come, they're astounded really that we don't have a problem with slugs, which must be really annoying, but that things attracting wildlife into the garden is going to help. So frogs, toads, newts, birds, hedgehogs, it all helps in the gardens. Obviously, don't use any form of chemicals. We don't use pesticides or herbicides. So that would be the number one thing to avoid if you're starting out as an organic grower. And then it's keeping a healthy growing space. So you're vigilant. If you're going out and you're looking for slugs, you're looking for aphids and caterpillars, and you're picking them off at an early stage, then you're not going to have a build-up of problems. Equally with weeds, if you're just pulling them out when they're small, then there's no need to go for spraying chemicals on anything because it's just so easy to achieve. So it's using resources responsibly would be the final point that I'd make out of the 5 points. And that's a case of reusing plastic trays, making sure that you're using peat-free compost as well, potting compost. So you're not turning the tap on, you're reusing rainwater to water plants.
Excellent. Just to dive a bit more into Ian's question, he asks Anton, must he always buy certified organic seeds or tubers? And when would his own saved seeds be organic if they originated from non-organic seeds? What would you say to that?
Ideally, we would always try and buy organic seeds if they're available. Sometimes you find that they're just not available for the thing that you want to grow, if you've got a specific variety you want to grow. So then, in which case, you might buy non-organic seeds, but the important thing is to make sure that they're not treated chemically, because you really don't want to be growing plants from seeds which have got fungicides or chemicals on them. For tubers, I would say it's perhaps more important to try and get organic ones, because often the tubers have been treated with fungicides. Yeah. So as to whether you could call the seeds that you've saved from those plants organic, even if they hadn't been grown from non-organic seeds, we would say yes, that would be fine, especially if they've all been grown to sort of organic principles on a site that's managed organically. Then yeah, we would say that plant has had a sort of organic life and it's produced seeds. I think we can say they're organic by that stage.
Excellent advice. Let's just talk a little bit about the fruit bushes and trees and things like that. If you come into a garden or an allotment and there's some established plants there, how long do you need to look after them organically before you've effectively converted them?
It's difficult to know when you're moving to a new plot because you don't know how long those plants have been there. So I would give it 2 or 3 years. The official stance is 3 years, but once you've been growing a plant for a couple of years in your garden and been practicing organic growing in that plot, then you can consider that is an organic plant.
Okay, thank you. So what about compostable materials? So this is where people need to put something on their soil. And Ian uses the example of spent brewer's grains or hops. But of course, we often get questions about manure, if it's organic or not, spent mushroom compost. There's all sorts of different things that people want to put on their soil and want to know, is that organic?
I think that's quite a tricky one, really. I mean, organic systems, we're trying to sort of balance out our environmental impact as well. So composting is a really great thing to do because we are making the best use of those resources. So if you're putting, let's say, for example, you're putting non-organic things into a compost heap, the official line is you can use that after 6 months. Really, whether that's safe or not depends on what's been put in there and what fungicides are on it, and that's quite difficult to sort of ascertain. I think we have to also be realistic that there's no such thing as a completely pollution-free, uncontaminated plot. There's going to be small amounts from anywhere. We just try and minimise that and balance it out against sort of pragmatic values and common sense.
It is all about being pragmatic and having common sense. And one of the things in our booklet that we talk about is something of a traffic light system, just to give people a bit more guidance on what you absolutely shouldn't do, what is acceptable, and what's absolutely the gold standard, what's the best organic practice. So I think you'll find answers to an awful lot of questions in the Principles of Organic Gardening booklet. Thank you very much, both of you. Lots of really interesting stuff we've covered this month. Good to see you. That's all we've got time for this month. My thanks to Jules and Anton for all their wisdom, and thanks again to Becky Searle for such an insightful interview. I'm thinking very differently about the relationship between plants and soil now. You can get Becky's new book at all major book retailers, and you can follow her on Instagram if you search for So Much More. Join us again next month, where we visit Hugh Richards at his garden in West Wales. And if you're wanting to be sure you're making the most of your garden this spring, do check out our website at gardenorganic.org.uk and sign up for our monthly newsletter. And you can follow us on social media. We're at Garden Organic UK. Thanks so much to Kevin MacLeod for the music, and I'll see you next time.